Good morning. It's great to see you here this morning on this cold and somewhat snowy, a little more icy day. We're glad that you're here, taking some time out to worship God and to give thanks to God and offer to Him our thanksgiving for Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, who brings us here to this place. So we're glad that you're with us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Grateful to Kara and Jonathan for the ministry of music this morning. And we're grateful to have as our preacher, Pastor Dan Hannay, who is currently the associate pastor at Jackson Friends Church in Jackson, Ohio. And Dan and I got to know each other a little bit at what was then Malone College many years ago. He was 3 years ahead of me. But then about maybe 4 years ago, we renewed our friendship because one Saturday morning we had a ministry where I was in Akron on a Saturday morning that we hosted with a whole bunch of churches coming in to host a ministry of worship and feeding for the homeless and the poor. And some people from Dan's church was involved. And so one Saturday morning, Dan shows up. And it's like, I know you, right? We hadn't seen each other in a long time, but we still recognized each other in the midst of the graying hair. So we renewed our friendship. So I asked Dan if he would come and offer a word to us this morning, and he graciously consented. So Dan, we look forward to your word. Look forward to your word. Friends, we have come here to worship God. We are in between Christ the King Sunday, which we celebrated last week, and First Sunday in Advent, which we will remember. We will enter into that season this Sunday. And a reminder to us that because of Jesus Christ, the church counts time different from everyone else. Our time is centered around the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, who makes all things new. And so we have come here in this time to center ourselves, to be reminded of what is at the center of our lives and who is at the center of our lives. And so let's count these moments of time as something that God has given to us in His grace, and enjoy the presence of God. To love God and enjoy God forever, as the old confession states. I invite you now to stand for the call to worship. The race is set before us.
Jesus give us strength.
The challenge sometimes seems overwhelming.
Jesus give us patience.
You're all living hope.
Let us pray together. Ever-sustaining God, in every generation you call your people to contend against the brutality of sin and betrayal. Keep us steadfast even in our fear and uncertainty, that we may follow where Jesus has led the way. Amen.
Every grain of My text today is found in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, if you care to follow along as I read. I'd like to back up just a little bit and read some from Hebrews chapter 11, particularly beginning in verse 39. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder, perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. This is an interesting time in life for me because I am approaching the 40th year of ministry, pastoral ministry. And I remember reading a passage of Scripture when I had just converted to Christ. I was age 19 then. It spoke about the brevity of life, and I'm sure when I read it you'll be familiar with it. It's found in James chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Well, as I look back on that, I kind of laugh about this brevity of life thing, because then I said rather foolishly at age 19 that I plan on living at least into my mid-80s. So here I am at 63 years of age. I'm not really laughing right now. I'm just saying to myself, you know, time goes by so fast. And it's hard to believe that I am where I am now. Well, Social Security tells me, I guess, that I can retire at 66 in 2 months, and my financial planner said that would probably be a good thing for me to do. But I have to tell you that I am looking forward to my next season of ministry. I am really in transition right now. I don't intend to be with Jackson Friends Church but about 3 years. So I'm already thinking about what the next season of ministry looks like. And one of the ways that I'm tackling this new challenge is asking myself some pretty important questions. First of all, how do I finish well and leave an enduring legacy for Christ? Now, when I read these questions before I read the next two, let me just say to you, I think that's a question, if you're beginning in ministry, that you ought to ask yourself right now. You ought not to wait until you're my age to be asking that question. That's a question every ministry student ought to be asking. Even as they're in seminaries, they think about their next place of service. What kind of investment in people's lives can I make to help them advance the kingdom of God? And how does God want me to steward the time I now have left and making these final years count? So I want to challenge you today, if you're a third-year student here at the seminary, or a first-year student here at the seminary, or if you're already in ministry right now, you ought to be asking those kinds of questions, because hopefully the goal that all of you have in ministry is that you will finish well, that you will run the race with endurance, that you will cross the finish line of faith. I want to say that crossing this finish line, as I was thinking about this, reminded me of what the Apostle Paul had said to Timothy as Paul was awaiting his execution. He said, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time for my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." And I look at this passage and I think to myself, what is it that really sustained Paul? What could we point out in our study of Scripture, particularly in his letters, that really sustained him, that enabled him to be able to come to this point in his life where he could say with confidence, "I have finished the race, I have kept the faith"? Well, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the question that I ask myself is, what is it that will sustain me? What is it that will sustain you as you minister in and among the people that God has brought to you to serve? I really believe that Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 is really a ministry template. And I do believe that this Hebrews 1 and 2 actually gives us 3 looks today that we need to take to not only be sustained in ministry, and I can't emphasize that enough, because ministry is a long race of endurance. And there are times when we just simply are not able, when we may feel like we're not able to continue in this race, but God can and will sustain us. So how does He do this over time? And how does that help us to be fruitful in ministry and to be teachable in ministry? Isn't that an important part of what it means to be sustained? Are we a teachable people? Are we willing to have that kind of attitude as we're in ministry? And purposeful in ministry? Those are 3 things that I think are really important. So what are the 3 looks that we need to take that I think, and let me just say this, not only apply to you in ministry, but also apply to places like Christian colleges and universities and even seminaries like Ashland Theological Seminary? Well, the first look that we can take is found in Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, we want to take the first look by looking back for encouragement. We want to look back for encouragement. I remember not long ago what John R.W. Stott said, that discouragement is the occupational hazard of ministry. And I venture to say that in my 39 years of ministry, I can think of countless times when I have felt discouraged, when things haven't turned out the way I thought they would, that the expectations that I brought into ministry fell far short of the reality in which I found myself. And it wasn't difficult for the enemy to bring discouraging thoughts and bring a sense of despair into my life. And I know that I have needed to be encouraged. But God provides us, doesn't He, in Hebrews chapter 11 with countless examples of what we can look to in order to encourage us when things are looking not so well. And when you look through Hebrews chapter 11, as I did this morning in my devotions, just to remind myself, is that they were commended for their faith. And here's the thing about Hebrews 11 and those witnesses. It's not so much them that they are observing us, let's say it that way, that they're the spectators looking at us, but rather we should be looking at them. That they are bearing witness to us that God can see us through no matter what circumstance it is that we're facing. And so we need to look back for encouragement. Now, I'll bet you today that in your path, providentially so, that there have been Christian people who have impacted your life for good and precisely at the right time. It could be a pastor, your parents, a teacher, a seminary professor, a guidance counselor. It might be a financial provision given at precisely at the right time or a specific answer to prayer. I remember as my wife and I were preparing to move to Wilmore, Kentucky to begin at Asbury Theological Seminary, and we were just discussing this the other day. I said, do you remember the woman who came up to me after church and handed us a $1,500 check? And she goes, oh yeah, that was Shirley Wagner. Well, it just so happened that $1,500 check was absolutely given to us at the right time when we needed it. Here's what I'd like you to do today before you leave. I think you can make a list. There's grocery lists, but there's also lists that I think each of us ought to make. Take time and say, what are the 10 things as you look back over your life where I've actually seen where God has intervened providentially at the right time, at the right place, with the right people. And let that list become a list of encouragement. Let that list become a list where God begins to foster in each and every one of you, including myself, a grateful spirit. It's amazing what God has done. You know, I start to think about this, and when you think about the Passover in the Exodus, that is a celebration of God's rescue. And one of the reasons why it was done year in and year out was to remind the people of God that God is a God of salvation. And so reminding ourselves by looking back and seeing where God has worked in our lives, who has brought you to this place right now, because He orders the steps of the righteous. Look back for encouragement. The second look is one that requires a willingness to be honest, accountable, and teachable. And I do believe that sustainable ministry is not possible without those dynamics in operation, and I mean that. I think we need to be willing to be honest, to be transparent, to be vulnerable in ministry. It's really not about us, is it? It's about Him. And accountable. Lord knows we need that as a discipline in our lives, to be accountable. And how about teachable? You know, it's either I know it all or I know enough. One of the ways that God has chosen to keep me accountable is I have a 6-year-old grandson that is fond of calling me Mr. Smarty Pants. And I got to thinking about that, and I said, well, throughout the course of ministry, I think I have taken on that role of Mr. Smarty Pants, that I've been Mr. Answer Man, that I had all the answers to the problems of the church and situations. And I realized, no, I didn't have really all those answers, but I knew the one who did. Let me just say that even last Sunday, just as last Sunday, I got tested on all three of those things. I got tested in terms of my honesty, my accountability, and my teachability. Because I forgot to schedule something that was very important to a couple in church, and it turned up in the bulletin, and it wasn't there, and they were upset. And so I had to decide at that very moment when they approached me, am I going to own this or not? Am I simply going to say, okay, well, it was the secretary's fault and it was a misprint in the bulletin or whatever else it was, to kind of shift the blame and not take ownership? You know, if we're going to lead people as the servants of God, we ought to be willing to be open, and to be honest and vulnerable, and just simply say, you know what, I messed up. Would you forgive me? I think that's what maintains a leader's credibility. And that's a very important thing to have in ministry, is to build trust and credibility with the people that you serve. The second look I want to talk about is look out for entanglements. In Hebrews chapter 12, in the next part of the verse, it says, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Now, I'm not about to try to figure out exactly what weight and sin means. I'll leave that up to you. And perhaps you can ask Dr. Bevere what those things mean. So I'm going to depend on F.F. Bruce. And if that's okay with you, I think that's going to be okay with me. This is what he said about weight. The athlete must discipline himself. He must divest himself of all superfluous weight. Not only heavy objects carried about the body, but excessive bodily weight. There are many things which may be perfectly all right in their own way, but which must be laid aside. It may well be that it's a hindrance to one entrant in this spiritual contest is not a hindrance to another. Each must learn for himself what in his case, is a weight or impediment. So I don't want to be here this morning and actually say, okay, well, this is what I think this means for you. But I really do believe that God, through His Holy Spirit and His Word, can point out what that weight is that may be holding us back. One of the things I'm grateful for is that I married a woman who's a very godly woman. Alan knows who she is. She actually went to Malone University. I guess it's university now. It used to be Malone College. But I have to say that I don't really have a problem with identifying with what those weights are, because God put somebody in my life, namely my wife, who knows exactly what it is, the hindrances. And she's not meant to judge, but to help. Self-awareness is hard sometimes. It's hard for me sometimes to understand exactly what it is that's weighing me down. What is it that is impeding the progress in my life? I had to think about this. I had losing weight, and I think about Jesus, and I said, well, Jesus is a weightlifter. Well, you think about that a little bit. A weightlifter. I'm not talking about pumping weights, but a person who knows how to lift the weights from our lives. Some commentators have suggested that these weights are a spirit of, well, overconfidence or arrogance or even complacency. Those things in ministry are very real. They stand in front of us, that we can be overconfident and we can think of ourselves more important than we ought to think. We ought to think of ourselves with sober judgment, as Paul writes about in Romans chapter 12. The sin piece that Bruce writes, he says our author's not referring so much to some specific or besetting sin. In other words, he's not really saying, okay, here's one specific sin in your life that is holding you back. But he said, in the common sense of the phrase, but the sin itself is something which will inevitably encumber the runner's feet and trip him up before he has taken a step or two. Just think about that for a minute. I'm not going to suggest today that it is the sin of unbelief. But wasn't that what kept Israel out of the promised land? Who wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years? Were they still God's children? Of course they were. And yet because of missteps, because of sin, they ended up not experiencing the blessings that God had before them in the promised land. And then I got to thinking about this. I heard Timothy Warner said something about, that's kind of like Christianity. You either have wilderness Christians or you have promised land Christians. There's a lot of people in God's family that are still wandering around in the wilderness, not really exactly sure where it is that God wants them to be or wants them to do. But God wants us to be promised land Christians, to be people who believe in Him, who trust in Him. You see, when I think about the steps, I think about we can start well in the course of ministry, but over time it's possible and perhaps likely that our steps will stop due to some sinful action we've taken. I don't think I have to remind us this morning about the multiple stories we've read about sexual misconduct. I think of one person in particular, and if I mention his name today, you will know right away. Because I used to take some of my own parishioners there for training. But I recall reading on a post, a friend of Dr. Bevere, Scott McKnight, saying in reference to this particular leader, that 40 years of ministry and trust were wiped away because of sexual sin. It's grievous. And notice I didn't call it sexual misconduct. It's sexual sin. So we need to look out for entanglements. We need to watch out for them. And then finally, what I want to say is we need to look forward to ending well by keeping our eyes on Christ. Now this is really important today. Let me just read the text. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. When I look at Hebrews chapter 11, I see that same look on the part of Abraham. Let me read 11 and verse 8. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as his inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. And by faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. This idea of looking means trust. And let me just clarify something here. When we talk about these looks here today, we're not talking about compartmentalizing these looks. Like, okay, I'm going to look back for encouragement today, and then tomorrow I'm going to look out for the entanglements, and then maybe 3 weeks from now I'm going to look to the cross. All of these looks here are taken simultaneously. They're looks that we need to take every day. Even in my devotional practice in the morning, I take those same 3 looks. I look back for encouragement. What is it that can encourage me? Where have you answered prayer in my life, Lord, that I can give you praise and honor and glory? And record that. And let that just soak in and saturate my spirit. What are the entanglements? What are the things, Lord, lately that I've really been struggling with, that I need to surrender to you, where I need to release the controls, where I need to move from this to this, and say, God, I'm open to you. And then to keep my eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. You know, that's not just about you and I here today. This is about our churches. It's a template that has multiple applications. Not just for your own private spiritual life, but for the churches that you serve in. The institutions you teach in. It's so important. One of the professors I had at Asbury that is with the Lord now, and I want to share this with you because I shared this with my wife, it was really good, was Dr. Robert Mulholland. I had him for New Testament history and criticism. He was a great man of God. And I have his books, and this one is called Invitation to a Journey. And he talks about this issue of control, because I would have to say control is a big problem that we have. It's a constant problem. So let's just start off to wet your whistle a little bit and see what his take is on this. He said, spiritual formation is a process of being conformed to the image of Christ. A journey into becoming persons of compassion, persons who forgive, persons who care deeply for others in the world, persons who offer themselves to God to become agents of divine grace in the lives of others in the world, and brief, persons who love and serve as Jesus did. Now, if I said spiritual formation was a process of conforming ourselves to the image of Christ, I suspect we would have been much more comfortable. But the difference between conforming ourselves and being conformed is the vital issue of control. If you do not believe control is a major issue in your life, study the ways you respond when someone or something disrupts your plan for the day. That's a good test. Our constant struggle with the issue of control is a crucial part of our spiritual pilgrimage. I don't mind spiritual formation at all, as long as I can be in control of it. As long as I can set the limits on its pace and its direction, I have no problem. What I do have is a problem with is getting my control structures out of the way of my spiritual formation, and listen very carefully, letting God take control. In the final analysis, there is nothing we can do to transform ourselves into persons who love and serve Jesus as Jesus did, except to make ourselves available for God to do that work of transforming grace in our lives. If you don't think that's real, I had a man come in my office yesterday, 80 years old, with depression issues. And one of the things that kept coming up in our session was, I need to do more. I need to do more. I need to do more. This is not about performance. This is about surrender. And letting God conform us rather than us being controlled to conform ourselves. I see my time is getting close. Look forward to ending well by keeping your eyes on Christ. Let us run the race with endurance, the race that's set before us. Don't give up. Keep your eyes focused. In the Boston Marathon, people train for that race, and everybody has to pace themselves, just as we do in ministry. Now, I'm not a runner. I'm a mountain biker and a road cyclist. Even at my age, I still like to get out and tear it up a little bit while I can. But Heartbreak Hill is at the 20.5-mile mark. The incline is not so great, but at 20.5 miles, you're hurting. Once you get to the crest of the hill, the Prudential Tower comes in view. That's the signal that you know you've got just a little ways to go. When we keep our eyes fixed on Christ, we're going to get at a certain mile mark in ministry. And we're going to need to make sure that we're looking ahead and looking forward, because it may seem like it's a slog, it's a grind, and it's not meant to be. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus for the purpose of ending well, crossing the finish line. That's the look we all need to be taking. I'm going to finish with this story. Alan, can I take 2 more minutes? When I entered ministry 39 years ago, I did so in a small church of about 50 in Brewster, Ohio. I was a history major at Malone College then, and I knew nothing about preaching, teaching, funerals, marriages. I just went there and I loved Christ. And the superintendent in the French church at that time had encouraged me to, if this is your calling, let's go try it out. It's kind of what works in Cuba, right? If you really believe that you're a pastor, go plant a church and then come back, and then we'll think about seminary. Well, after we had settled into the parsonage, somehow word got out to a nursing home director in the community that there was this new pastor at the church, and I got a phone call, and he asked me if I'd be interested in doing a Bible study there and visit with the residents. And I said, sure. I mean, it was a stipend. It wasn't much, I think at that time, $100. And certainly I didn't go into ministry to make money, but it was helpful, and the experience was great. I have to tell you, there are days when I couldn't wait to leave. I hate to say that to you, but it was such an overwhelming thing. The smells, my acquaintance with loneliness, it was hard to take. And then one day I happened into the room of a Methodist pastor who had retired. And he had suffered a severe stroke. Couldn't talk, but he could still understand. He could still understand what you were saying to him. So he smiled and gave you eye contact and so on. And I remember being so impressed, even though we couldn't talk, just about the nature of this guy. Here he is. And the nursing home manager, the nursing floor manager came up and said, one of the things that he does that we all hear about is he'll break out in song. And it's not uncommon for him to sing. And can it be that I should gain an interest in the Savior's blood? I'm 23 years of age. I didn't know nothing about nothing when it came to ministry, but that had a big impact in my life. And it said something to me that this man was crossing the finish line of faith victoriously. And I still think if I ever had a stroke or everything else that happens to me, and I'm getting to that age where that can happen, because you start looking at the obit columns and seeing who's around still. I hope that the song of Christ will be expressed, the love and the adoration of Jesus. There's 3 looks. Look back for encouragement, look out for entanglements, and look forward to ending well for the kingdom of God. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I thank you so much for the power of your word. Lord, how this simple message here today has impacted my life. And as we stop and think about where we are in our theological studies and the classes we take, help us to take the view that every book we read, every paper we write, is not because we're after grades, but we're here to learn to the glory of God so we can be a blessing to others and then some. Thank you, we love you, we praise you. Thank you for Ashland Seminary. I lift this institution up into your love and your light and pray your blessings, your guidance and direction upon it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. Friends, let's now prepare for prayer. Could we just have a few moments of silent prayer? I ask you to lift up any cares and concerns and thanksgiving before God, and then we will close together in prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, hear now our prayers that come from the depths of our hearts, for our thanksgiving, for our cares and concerns. We lift them to you, trusting and knowing that you have heard and you will answer. Amen. Let us now join together in our prayer. Almighty God, your name is glorified even in the anguish of your Son's death. Grant us the courage to receive your anointed servant, who embodies a wisdom and love that is foolishness to the world. Empower us in witness so that all the world may recognize in the scandal of the cross the mystery of reconciliation. Amen.
Please feel free to join us in worship. If you want to stand, feel free.
Mercy of our God.
I'd give the benediction in the Methodist style, but I'm not a Methodist, so I don't know how that goes, but anyway, the Lord be with you, and may He cause His face to shine upon you this day. Go in His peace, and keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith today.